Hello, everybody. I'm delighted to join you all this morning to talk a little bit about the employee deal that can change your performance management. So we are Tandem, and as Dagmar pointed out, you can think of our platform like performance management meets employee experience. And we've the good privilege of talking to people every day about their performance management strategies, the way that they're evolving performance management, and indeed how they can unlock growth to accelerate performance. So we get to see inside, I suppose, the practicalities of what people are doing with their performance management strategies. And I've been working in performance management for over 25 years now, and I've never been more excited about what's going on, because the last 18 months has seen such a shift and such a change in this space, and real creativity going on where people are really unlocking great employee experience from their PM strategies. So I wanted to share a little bit about that with you today, and let's get into it. So the reality, I suppose, is that so many of our employees have now felt a little bit of remote working and hybrid working, and that demand remains. So regardless on whether you're on a march back to the office, I think the employees will win out that some form of hybrid or remote working is probably here to stay. But what's interesting about it is not just that we connect with each other through technology, but the context from which we're coming from. You know, in an office, we were all democratized. We had the same experience in the same space, and we were pretty much all experiencing the same thing at the same time. But if you think about our context now, we're coming in at work from a different space with different distractions, with kids and dogs running around in the background and all sorts of humanity going on behind us. And I think that's what's different now, is that we've got this moment where we've experienced such humanity together, of the fear of humanity, the laughing at ourselves, the crying, all of the tears of the last 18 months, we've shared them together as work colleagues. And you might have seen this manifesto from Google do the rounds on LinkedIn, and it got a lot of praise and applause, and for good reason. What it does is it really speaks to the human behind the work. For the first time, the employer is really addressing the humanity of being confused, of asking for help, of having a cry, of it's okay to not be okay. And I think that's why it's breakthrough for us in HR to start thinking about, is that human centricity here to stay? And I really believe that as HR folks, we have just got the biggest opportunity in our hands to bed down the people agenda, build it around human centricity at the core, and architect new employee deals that can really define and shape a new experience. And that's what a lot of people are doing today. And no better place to do it than with your performance management strategy. So before we dive into how you might go about doing that and some of the things that we're seeing in practicality, I'd love to hear from you if you're already working on this and architecting new deals for your employees, whether that be reshaping your performance management strategies or the experience of your people. I'd love to hear from you if you're already working on this or if you have plans to. So I think, Dagmar, somebody somewhere is going to run a poll for me. So I'd love to figure what is happening with the polls. So there they are. It looks like they're in progress, which is great. Yeah, fantastic. So
it will take a while because we have a little bit of delay in the different platforms, but 25 people already taking part, so it's getting higher and higher.
Fantastic. Great. I see those numbers shifting around quite a bit. Lots of people in different places with this, I think, by the looks of things. What about you, Dagmar? Are you working on architecting new deals for your employees?
Definitely. So I have different projects where performance management definitely is one of the most important topics. And I think also the virtual new world of working and the future of work, which we heard from Christian, there is a need for a new performance management. Yeah, you cannot measure the time being in the office. I mean, that was not the real track, to be honest.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And maybe it's over too, but we certainly have a great opportunity to change it now.
So we have 141 now.
Ah, fantastic. Great. What are they telling us?
So unfortunately, I need to...
Point confusion.
Yeah, I thought I could see it, but I still see our video.
Ah.
And not the poll.
Okay. Well, while we're sorting that out, yeah.
So now I have the results. So 41% said not yet, but we are working on it. 39 said yes, no 17%, and other 3%. So.
Oh, wonderful.
I think your topic is coming perfectly at the right time now.
Fantastic. Well, hopefully I can provoke some thought for those of you who aren't working on it to think about it, because I think we have some incredible moments that if we don't seize them now, we may miss our opportunity to really bed down that human centricity that I think we always kind of wanted, but it never had the center stage that it has today. So let me talk to you about what some people are doing in this space and talk to you about how you might go about it. If my slides would move on, but now they're not playing fair with me anymore. Let's see if I can move this slide on. Here we go. So one of the things that we're really seeing out there when we work with clients is the expectation from employees has got so much greater now, because coming with hybrid working and remote working, we're also seeing that there's a demand for a different style of management. I want to be managed in a different way because some of the old rules don't apply anymore. So for example, we're seeing that while we may have had sporadic feedback happening in the past, and maybe you got feedback in moments of heightened praise or punishment, or you did something incredibly right or incredibly wrong, you would have got feedback. But we're seeing that not just continuous feedback is wanted, but employees want to own the opportunity to go and seek out and receive feedback. So if it's not coming to them naturally, they want to take it into their own hands and go, you know what, I haven't got enough feedback from my manager or from my peer. I want to get more. I want to understand how I'm doing. So putting some tools and license to the employees to go and seek out feedback is really important. And I think it's not really enough to go and say, well, sure, go ask for feedback, because that's an odd thing to do. It's really hard to rock up to somebody and go, can you give me some feedback? So we've got to help them a little bit with how do we go about that? How do we give them license and tools and prompters and tips for seeking feedback? The other thing that we're seeing a lot of is a move away from the classic individual goals that are cascaded from the top right down. What we saw during the last 18 months is that teams had to react very swiftly to what was happening on the ground, and that many of those teams were front facing. So they were the ones dealing with the customers or the supply chains or selling into customers in new ways. So they had to recreate the rule book about how they go about doing these things. And there were no easy answers or clear paths ahead that leadership could give clear direction on. So teams started to reiterate and reshape and rethink how are we going to do things. And this has really spurred on a new direction for goals. We're seeing a lot of agile team empowerment coming into goals, so that goals are not just top down, but they're equally bottom up. They're equally people saying, well, I think we need to do these things. And we're not entirely clear about the end state, but we need to move in this direction and reiterate as we go. So you see a lot more short-term, reiterative and agile approach to goals happening that doesn't really have the patience or time to wait for annual cascade of goals. I think as well there's a shift in mindset and perspective about how I'm managed. And I think that was the thing about office life, is that you could end up living with managers who were prone to micromanagement or, presenteeism or these sorts of things that we believed were part of management maybe at one point, but we've long outgrown them. So what we're seeing now is the kind of management that's going down very well right now is almost sports coach style management. So they may not be on the pitch doing the job, but they're there in the background coaching, enabling, supporting, directing, inspiring their people to do the right things. So we're sort of moving away from that classic I'm managing you to I'm enabling you to do your best around here, to perform to your optimum levels, which I think is a really interesting shift from where we were at. And look, performance management will always be a process in some ways. But I think it was a very flat process. It was like, put your goals in here at a certain time, give feedback at these particular times, talk about performance once or twice a year. So it felt like a very flat process and often one way, not bi-directional in nature. So I think we're moving away from that kind of flat process to a much more inspiring experience where we can talk all of the time, where we have check-ins and feedback much more frequently, and where the employee has an equal part to play. They're not a passive passenger on this journey anymore. They're really coming at the conversation in a much more adult way, where they bring their perspective about themselves and their performance in an equal way to how the manager does. And the old carrot of performance evaluation, regardless of whether you're a rating culture or a non-rating culture, and I meet both all the time, I love this new concept that David Ulrich coined, and I think it doesn't get talked about enough. It's that concept of positive performance accountability. So it's this idea that maybe the rank and yank days of the past are gone. Maybe we don't want those old descriptions of ratings that kind of were a little uninspiring by nature. But there's still a place for us to talk about performance. We still have to hold each other to account for our performance. We still have to talk about what the challenges are, where we need to keep our focus, where we're not quite there yet. And there's a place for those conversations to happen. And all too often, I meet companies who went on this journey, threw out ratings, asked people to have regular check-ins, but didn't really put moments of accountability into their process. And they've suffered because of that. And suddenly performance starts to leak out of the organization. And before you know it, some CEO comes in and goes, this isn't working, let's bring back ratings. And we're back to square one, and we've lost a lot of credibility with our people. So I think as you're designing the new approach to performance, we've got to think about, when do those moments happen around accountability and how do they play out? What kind of prompters are we giving our leaders to talk about performance in a new way? And finally, I think everybody knew that we were comparing them. The calibration curves, the stack ranking, all of that was about, is Aisling better than Dagmar, or is Joe better than Jill, and all this kind of stuff that we were at for a long time. I see a lot of companies moving away from that very traditional calibration of comparing people with each other and moving to a much more place of helping people compete with their personal best. So, is that person living up to their strengths and their potential? Can we push them a little bit further? Because we see little evidence points of these things happening, and we really want to ensure that, they're doing as much as they can to perform at their personal best. So we see a move away from calibration to people days, which I think is a much more inspiring concept for us to embrace. And if you think about it, everything that happens in performance management defines the experience that employee is having in the organization. And so much of that experience is innately human. It's because as humans, we want to know our purpose. We want to know that what we're doing is part of something bigger. It's part of a bigger contribution. It's part of a bigger team. It's part of a community. And we tend to find our communities at work now rather than in our homes. So we want to feel part of that and a valued part of that, one where we're appreciated for the good work we're doing. We're given direction when we're off track. But as well a place where we have greater ownership. And I think this is the reality, that if we're embracing hybrid working, we have to get very clear about what pieces do you own, because we can't all shuffle around the office and go, are you doing this? We have to be really clear. You're doing this, you're accountable for this, and this is what success looks like. This is the bar that we expect. So it's not just a goal anymore. It's a description of the success of the goal, but it's also a description of the red line where that goal is no longer acceptable, so that we're enforcing that moment of accountability back in. But all of these things, when you think about it, there are things that we want as humans. You know, there's a reason the self-help industry is $1 billion industry. There's a reason why we make New Year's resolutions every year. We want to be a better version of ourselves. And I think performance management has the potential to meet that very human need to want to better ourselves all of the time and to be valued for it. So if you were going on this journey and you were thinking about, well, how would I create human centricity as the core of my performance management strategy? There's some brilliant research and great people to look at to help you along the way. One of my favorites is an author called Tamara Chandler, who's a great keynote speaker as well. If you ever get the chance to catch her, do. And she talks about these 3 pillars, and she talks about it in context of feedback, but I think you could extend it to performance management as well. And one is fairness. And when we think about fairness, there's so many lenses by which we can look at. Is our strategy fair? Is our process fair? Is it fair that an employee goes in and the manager has received all of this feedback about the employee and then just lands it on the employee? Like, should we allow the employee to bring in their own versions of feedback, collate their own evidence about themselves so that they can kick off the conversation in a much more adult way? There's a wonderful article by McKinsey called The Fairness Factor. It's a few years old, but it stands the test of time, and it's well worth checking out if you want to really look at how to embed fairness into your strategy, because there's so much more to it than I have time to cover today. The other thing is focus. I think we need to be incredibly focused about every layer of the process, because, you know, one of the mistakes and pitfalls I see a lot of organizations have fallen into before we work with them is they've moved to a much more progressive performance management strategy, but they've been too high level about it. They've I want every manager to have a one-to-one with their team member every month, and I want them to talk about performance every quarter, and I want them to give feedback more regularly. But if we leave that just as is and we don't focus about what you want them to talk about in those one-to-ones, then chances are the manager or the employees slip back into the everyday work mode and end up talking about the tasks, the project, the activity, and neglecting the human behind the task. How are they doing? What's important to them? Where's their career aspirations? What do they need to develop in? What's a barrier? What's a challenge? So we really need to help them and prompt them through the whole experience so that we're very focused about what happens in those one-to-ones. When do we talk about well-being? When do we talk about development? When do we talk about performance? And when do we just have a regular catch-up on how's it going? And to really navigate those conversations. And I was a HRD for years, and I had everybody demented going on training courses for great coaching skills and mentoring and all of these things, because I was a big fan of manager as coach as a concept. And training is great for kickstarting new behaviors, but it's not great at sustaining behaviors. And that's the core, is we've got to build that focus into our technologies so that those behaviors are sustained over time and they're not just part of a kind of a brief deluge into, oh, we did that for a little bit, but we kind of forgot about it. And finally, frequency. So, you know, there's a huge shift toward frequency, regular check-ins, more real-time feedback, you know, performance conversations on a more regular basis, development goals being more frequent. And I think frequency is really important, but we've got to make sure that we don't burden our organization with the level of frequency that we're asking them to do big performance reviews, cumbersome processes every quarter, because we'll find resistance in that as well. So, great fun. My slides don't move when they're supposed to move, but we'll get there. Okay. So overall, what I see is this move from performance management to performance enablement. And I think performance management needs a rebrand. I think the idea that we can manage someone else's performance is really kind of dated. We can enable them, we can coach them, we can help facilitate their greatness. But, you know, do we really manage anyone's performance in the end? So I really see that there's layers to this new wave of performance enablement. The first one is real-time crowdsource feedback, getting feedback to people in the moment it matters. If it's gone beyond kind of 3 days, a week, the feedback starts to feel irrelevant, dated, and really, why are you talking to me about this now? We've got to get feedback to them in the time that it matters most. So if I walked out of here with my peers today and I went, can I have some feedback on my presentation, that I get it straight away and they don't get back to me in 2 weeks' time going, about that presentation, you know, because at that point, it feels like a judgment. We also need more navigated toolkits for check-ins. I think it's not enough to go, let's have more one-to-ones. We've got to be really clear what happens in those one-to-ones. What kind of prompts are we giving our leaders? What kind of prompts are we giving our employees so they meet those conversations and address them in the right way? We've developed this concept of performance check-ins, which I think is really valuable. And it came from our clients' feedback that they wanted more moments of performance conversations. They wanted a level of formality to the conversation, but they didn't want the cumbersome review happening every quarter. So we created these mezzanine options, which is like a performance conversation, but it's not got the burden of the whole process of performance management. And it's a lovely mezzanine option to kind of introduce those performance conversations, make sure they're happening, and make sure we all know where we stand. So we're not walking in blindly thinking my manager thinks I'm doing great if they don't. And it's a really nice way of enforcing the accountability. The other thing I think is development and generating those career growth stories. I think with development, sometimes we make the very big assumption that, you know, everybody knows what career they want. But in reality, most people don't, you know, especially if you're younger in the organization, you don't really know what your options are. So there's a moment before you talk about the career aspiration where you can really help the person understand, what are my strengths? What's my story here? What's the profile that I want to raise in the organization? What do I love doing? What would I love to do more of? And to really diagnose what that person is ultimately built for, so that then you can look at, well, what are the internal marketplace opportunities for that individual? But I think we've got to help them build their career growth story before we kind of push them into, you know, forcing them to choose on what kind of career do you want when they're very early on in that thinking process. And finally, I'm going to stick with my rebrand here. I'm still a big believer in the end of year reflection, of looking back on what's happened through the year, what are the lessons learned, what did we take from it, how did we grow, you know, where do we all stand? So I still think there's a place for that annual moment. I'm not going to call it a performance management review because I'm resisting the terminology, but maybe a performance enablement review where we still have that moment. And I know some people got rid of that moment, but I feel the gap of it when I'm working with clients, who, you know, many who've brought it back since. So if we were to go down this road, what's the impact of creating that new deal? You know, what really happens if you do? Well, here's the beauty. If you really go down this road, you can layer in a great feedback culture. And we see with our clients that, you know, feedback starts off, it's a dirty word. Nobody likes feedback. And you have to change the mindset around it. And often when people start using our technology, you know, we'll see 5-word feedback. So it's things like, great job, Dagmar, nice presentation, Dagmar, you know, really light and praise driven. But over time, and we have a lot of ratios and behavioral science behind this, we nudge them into more and more feedback. And the average word count on Tandem is 76 words. So over time, people get more and more fluent with giving each other feedback, and they're not afraid to address development feedback. We've got these 5-to-1 ratios, whereas if you've given 5 positive feedbacks, you have a license to give more constructive feedback on the next one. And it's a nice way of getting people to offer developmental feedback as well as praise. And over 71% of feedback is linked with a value or behavior. So now we're starting to bring the behaviors of our organization to life. We're not making personal judgment calls on people, but we are calling out behaviors when we see them. And 55% of that feedback is peer-to-peer. Now, this is the interesting thing, because we were curious about this and we were like, well, does that actually mean, do people value peer feedback as much as they value their feedback from their managers? So we did some surveys, and what we found out is they do actually. So people value feedback regardless of where it comes from. So they don't value manager feedback any more than they value peer feedback. So now we can open a much broader network of people giving me feedback about myself that I can value. So I think that's a really interesting insight from our people, that they want feedback from all sources. And we can accelerate leaders' coaching capabilities, but as well put those tools into the employees' hands. What we see on Tandem is employees get more demanding about, well, I want to have these conversations. So 1 in 5 check-ins are created by employees, and they're getting braver. So about 20% of the feedback that runs on Tandem is employees brave enough to give their managers feedback. So we start to even up the fairness factor and that adult way that we can work together going forward. And I'm going to leave you with one quick case study that we have, where we went into a bank and they didn't have much of a feedback culture. And we had this hypothesis that maybe feedback would create a ripple effect on other things. So we did a network analysis on their feedback in the early days. And you can see on the left-hand side, feedback is pretty sparse. But interestingly, feedback only happens within the team. So I'm only giving my immediate peers feedback. But over time, you'll see the network analysis gets deeper and deeper, and they start to give feedback cross-functionally, and they start to, go deeper, and it starts to move up and down organizational levels. So feedback is happening all over the organization. And we were curious. So we went in and talked to the clients and we said, what did that do? And they said they were amazed at how silos started to break down between people, how those barriers that used to exist between functions started to dissipate because people started to trust each other. If I'm giving you feedback and you're giving me feedback, I know you have my back. You're appreciating my work. You're appreciating me. So I know that I can trust you. So if I trust you, I can collaborate better with you. And if I collaborate better with you, I can share ideas and take risks together so we can do more things together. And this was the experience. So layering in these interventions in performance management isn't just about, it's nice to have, everybody loves feedback, they'll all be happier. No, it's about the culture you can create. You can create more collaborative, more innovative cultures if you layer in the right interventions at the right time. So I'm going to finish on that note to inspire you to think about the new deal that's emerging, the human centricity that you can put at the core of your performance practices to really deliver an experience that engages. We'd love to keep talking to you. So, you can't use an old map to explore a new world. And I would say the same for the future of performance. So let's continue the conversation. You can contact my colleague or link in with me. I'd love to keep talking to you all, or reach out at the conference. Thank you so much for listening.
Aisling, thanks so much for this inspiring presentation. It's almost coffee break, but there are also some questions, and I would really like to raise those questions if you have 2 more minutes left. So there is also from Pernilla a big thank you for the great and inspiring presentation. And she asked if you can please repeat some of the topics for continuous dialogues you recommended while you spoke. I think we will share the presentations, of course, with all participants, but maybe you can summarize the topics for continuous dialogues.
Yeah, so for continuous dialogues, we see a lot of people creating rich quality conversations, and they're a combination of ongoing feedback, but layered into it regular check-ins around topics like well-being, development, performance, and ways of working. So they're kind of the 4 key topics that we see people rotate on. And in our technology, you can navigate with tips and coaches and prompts around those topics as well, so that the managers are equipped to have those conversations. So that's the very quick synopsis of it, but be happy to share more offline.
Okay, great. So your colleague Megan already shared a link and the LinkedIn of your company, the LinkedIn profile of your company, and I think colleagues who are interested can of course follow you there. But there is also from Marguerite a question: when starting such an initiative, how do you ensure employees feel brave enough to give negative feedback to their managers, especially when they need to put their name and not stay anonymous?
Yeah. That is not an overnight journey by any means. And I think you've got to build in a feedback culture that gives people a license that says it's okay for us to give constructive feedback. And the role modeling needs to come from the top. So if you can get your leaders kind of being brave, then that ripple effect will happen throughout your organization. So I think there's a lot of role modeling, a lot of stakeholder management. It's not an overnight journey. You know, it's taken some of our clients 3 to 6 months to get there, but you can get there with the right level of determination.
Okay, great. And there is another comment, not a feedback. So Lorraine just stated they started with continuous feedback 5 months ago, and she also says it has truly been a game changer to work with this continuous feedback. So colleagues, big thank you. And Aisling, again, big thank you. It was a great, inspiring presentation, and have a great day. And see you next time at HRCoreAcademy. And again, thank you to you as a sponsor of this great event.